Welcome. I'm happy that you all managed to be here, and we are quite almost international today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Maier. He's one of the co-founders of Medidee Services, an international consultancy focusing exclusively on medical devices and IVD. He has more than 25 years of hands-on experience within the medical device industry, including the design and development of projects, product industrialization, and regulatory and quality affairs. Michael is a trained notified body auditor for ISO 13485 and MDD, and has served numerous international compliance programs. He will open our event today with an insight on IVD classification and lessons learned from the MDR transition. Michael, I'm very much looking forward to your talk. The stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Good morning to everybody. I apologize for the bad shaving. This is some of the corona measures, residues, secondary effects. If you do not move a lot around, so you stop shaving. I will go with you a little bit over the classification changes that we had with the IVD, not in the detail, and to have a look on some lessons learned from the more or less failing MDR transition in which we are today. What can we foresee coming from or learning from this MDR transition for what we should expect from the IVD transition that will come? So first of all, I would like to go with you through this paradigm shift for IVD classification, and the lessons learned. The most important thing is, what do I need to do to guarantee business continuity for the IVD products that you have already on the market today? So if we look at the IVD classification that we have today, we have positive lists in the directive. So we have a list A, a list B, we have self-tests, and we have other products. And the list A products, there are not so many around. List B products, neither. There is self-tests, few more products that are around in the market, and there are many other products. It's about 80%. Some claim even 85% of products that are out in the market today and that are not list A, not list B, and not self-tests. So the majority of the in vitro diagnostic devices that are out in the market are today not covered by scrutiny by a notified body. This means manufacturers, they do the technical documentation according to the directive, and they do in their own the conformity assessment, they issue a declaration of conformity, and they are ready to go to market. If we look now at the in vitro diagnostic regulation that is coming up, we see that there is a complete shift in approach. The GHTF and IMDRF have set up a system for classification of in vitro diagnostics, which has been more or less taken up by the European regulators when they made the IVDR regulation. And if we look at that regulation, we have a kind of a cascade classification system in place. So basically, you start with rule 1 and you go consecutively to all the rules until you find a match for your device. And if you do this exercise for many of the devices, or I would even say for almost 80% of the devices that are today with the others, then you will end up somewhere else than in rule 5. So rule 5 would be the corresponding rule to what today is all other devices from a point of view of a result of the classification. That means that if you go through this new classification system of the IVDR, you have a very big chance, if today you are among the others, you will end up with a notified body for the conformity assessment process of your device. So this is a real paradigm shift in classification. So this risk-based approach for classification, if you apply this to in vitro diagnostics, then the result of the classification in most cases puts you under notified body scrutiny. I mean, this makes fully sense, because if you look out today, what there is in the IVD market, there are many in vitro diagnostic tests where organizations like the WHO or other independent organizations have to provide testing to recommend certain tests or not, because there is no scrutiny really at the basis done with IVD tests in a big scale. So what happens to you is, as I said, if you are today with the general tests, there is only a very small chance that under the IVDR, your devices that you have on the market today, that they end up in Class A. Most of the general devices that are today without notified body scrutiny, they will move right away to Class C. So we did some kind of screening together with Sylvia and for products that we picked randomly, and in most cases what we saw is that you shift right away from general today to Class C, which is high risk IVD. There is some that go to Class B, some even go to Class D. If you are a self-test today, you will end up in Class B, but many of those also will switch to Class C. So this is the result of this paradigm shift that you will have to face. Now I have an example of devices, or of in vitro diagnostic devices, where these classification rules also turn out weird results, or where we have missing definitions. The first example I would like to share with you is the ongoing discussion to have the COVID test in Class D based on Rule 1. So Rule 1 says that devices intended to be used for the following purposes are classified as Class D, meaning the highest risk, including reference lab and all the scrutiny procedures. So detection of the presence of or exposure to a transmissible agent that causes a life-threatening disease with a high or suspected high risk of propagation. The problem there is, what does life-threatening disease mean exactly? Because any disease can be life-threatening depending on the group of patients you are looking at. So, I mean, if I formulate this in a very easy way, what needs to be the kill rate of a transmissible agent to become a life-threatening disease? Because any disease, as I said, depending on the patient group you are looking at, could be life-threatening for a certain group. And there is also the definition of the risk of propagation that needs some clarifications. Because if it is only the propagation, or if it is the combination of the two that makes or that has an impact on the classification, is not yet really clear. Then another question that should also be clarified here. I have a little bit the impression it would be good if this is a kind of an adaptive rule, depending on, for example, if WHO declares a pandemic, as those definitions are missing, it is not really clear what happens to such devices. If this rule is fixed as it is stated today, and there is no further clarification with the definitions, then many IVD that are tracking transmissible agents today, they will end up in high risk. They will have to undergo the scrutiny of Article 50, and such impact the competent authorities, the notified bodies, and the lab capacity we have in Europe. So that is something that the regulators have to work on. I know that there is a draft guidance on the way to clarify this classification issue, but we did not yet see this. We did not yet see this guidance, so that we could really state on it. Hopefully, there are good definitions for life-threatening and the risk of propagation in this new guidance. A second example, and there may be many out of the participants we have today in this talk that could be themselves in this mission. If you have IVD instrumentation, and if you look at your classification of your instrumentation, you somehow manage to get this in Class A per Rule 5. If you look now at the hematology analysis, whether they are really in Class A, I have my doubts, because those IVD devices do not involve specific reagents. So the robot is directly indicating, without a specific reagent, is giving indications on which you will base therapy. And I have my doubts whether many of those analyses may end up in another class than Class A. BSI has published a nice white paper on this and brings up this question. So if you check out this link and you go to the pages 12 and 13, where there is the discussion about instruments, you will have a little bit more explanations on the doubt that is behind this rule. So what we see among our clients is that there are many manufacturers of instrumentation devices that somehow do not see the urgency really. They come to us, yeah, could we make a pre-submission review, or could we make a check for preparing IVDR, and then we look through it, and it's in many cases the first thing we hit on is the classification that they did compared to the intended use really of the device. And that is a wake-up call for one of the other of those manufacturers of instrumentation. Now, depending on the classification you get, obviously, as I said, only if you remain in Class A, you can issue your own declaration of conformity in your own responsibility. All the other classes, they will have to undergo notified body scrutiny. And this will be 80% of all IVDs that are today on the market, compared to 20% that go under notified body scrutiny today. And there is, based on those two examples, there are other examples certainly around, that only the practice in the daily practicing will show up with the classification. So many of the devices will even end up in Class D. So there will be a lot of work for the reference labs and for the scrutiny procedure involving the competent authorities for those in vitro diagnostic devices. If we look a little bit on the transition period that we have for the IVDR, we see that you will be able to place products based on a declaration of conformity until May 22. IVDs have a shelf life often that is 3 to 5 years, depending on what kind of test it is. So this is a very important thing to consider. I will come to that in a moment. If you today are part of list A, list B, or self-test devices, your certificate, CE certificate that you have has a maximum validity until May 2024. If you recertified last year, the validity is 5 years. So if you recertify this year still, I mean, you can extend to 2024, but not any longer. But this only applies to about 20% of all the IVDs that are out there that today have a certificate. All the others that only have a declaration of conformity, that are not list A, not list B, not self-test, they will have to comply to the IVDR by May 2022 in order to be able to place devices on the market. Now, I come to the making available of IVD that have been placed on the market prior to the date of application of the IVDR. And there it is interesting to play with the shelf life. So if today you have IVD devices that are not list A, not list B, not self-test, and those devices have a decent shelf life, you can use this possibility to continue to make available IVD placed on the market to be able to continue to sell your products. If you look now on this graphic, it shows the supposed or the charge on the notified bodies. So what we see in yellow is the certification requests that those 22 notified bodies that are today designated for the in vitro diagnostic directive, they are facing. So that's representing a little bit the workload, this yellow triangle. By the date of application, we will have 5 times more need for certification of IVD devices. And this will be growing for all those devices then that still benefit from an IVDD CE certificate. So there is an enormous workload that will come from the IVD side to the few notified bodies that we have. What is important is that you consider that your staff, the staff of Medidee, other consultants, and all the notified bodies, they will get busier as those deadlines draw closer. So the longer you wait to start to implement and to prepare for the IVDR, the worse it will be to get any support or to get a notified body in timely to help you to get this transition done. This is an old representation of MedTech Europe showing the gap in the notified body availability. If you see the creation of the notified body system dated back to 1990, when the new approach, global approach at that time has been implemented, and competent authorities got aware about the problem that there is not sufficient competences within the competent authorities to deal with medical devices. And then the notified body system was created, and it took over 20 years to get this notified body system really work and run. And then we had what everybody knows, those few scandals and problems, and there was a decrease of the notified body capacity because many of them were closed for incompetence. And if you see what will happen now is that there is roundabout for this is considering only MDR now. For MDR, there is about 70% of capacity missing. It's a little bit less now. It's maybe 60% of capacity that is missing. But for IVDR, this turns out, or it looks today as this will end in a disaster because there is no notified body capacity available for IVDs that should undergo conformity assessment with a notified body. And it's even a problem for many of the IVD manufacturers that are on the market today being list A, being list B, or being a self-test, because there is absolutely no guarantee that the notified body you are with will survive the IVDR designation process. So there are today 22 notified bodies out, and I think at least half of those will disappear or will simply not make it to get designated as IVDR notified body. So bear that in mind. This slide summarizes a little bit who already has a designation and who probably will gonna do it, which notified bodies don't want to do it or do not do it today either. And you have then still also the problem with the UK notified bodies that disappeared or probably will not go into IVD anymore. What I recommend you to do is to observe the NANDO listing very closely and to be alert, to get those newsletters, look into forums, look on Medidee newsletters or other newsletters, on LinkedIn, what you can get information. There's always somebody who publishes if a new notified body is designated. Now, one or the other among you may wonder, because I only cite 3 notified bodies for IVDR, but there are 4 listed. One of them is BSI UK, and BSI UK, as you may know, those Brexit negotiations, they seem to go the hard way, and I have my doubts whether there will be BSI UK by the end of this year still a notified body that you could use because of the Brexit. So BSI in the Netherlands 2797 CE 2797 is designated for IVD as well. But BSI UK, it's counted double in the list, so this is why I only put 3 here. What are the lessons learned? What you should already have done at the day of today is to identify the cash cows that must absolutely pass the IVDR barrier. If you did not start with this, do it, because you will have to decide which products to continue and which products maybe you don't want to continue, because the effort to get from the essential requirements that you have today to the GSPR for the IVDR is a big step. Second thing you should do is to make a strategic plan and to prepare for setting up buffer warehousing for products that are already placed on the market with your distribution chain. And you should start this now. It depends on the shelf life that your devices have. If you have IVD devices, reagent stuff that has 5 years of shelf life, then you should now produce and put this in the distribution chain, because once it's placed on the market, you can continue to make it available until 2025. Meaning what you sold to a distributor, the distributor can continue to sell this until 2025. But it needs to be placed on the market before May 2022. And it depends a little bit on the sales figures, it depends a little bit on the market need, and each manufacturer should really look and plan this transition period to be able to guarantee some kind of business continuity in the phase where you may be ready for the IVDR, but you simply don't find a notified body that has the capacity to assess your device. And then there is not yet clear what will happen, whether there is a special ruling, whether there is a wild card coming from competent authorities or whatsoever. So if there is not such measures, then at least you can continue to make available products that are already placed on the market. So get the files for your cash cows compliant. Focus on performance evidence. because this is probably among the products that we see in many cases the biggest challenge. Products, there is a lot of experience, not really well documented. There is not scientifically sound studies that are available, and you will have to provide this data in order to get ready for the IVDR and to pass those GSPRs. If you want to do post-market performance follow-up, then you need to start this now to get sufficient data to be ready to substantiate your claims. Time passes quickly. So whatever you do once the IVDR is mandatory, so in May 2022, you need to ensure that the ball is not in your camp. That means you need to be ready to submit any day to a notified body. It's your only chance in a situation where there is a real crisis with availability of notified bodies. Then competent authorities or the politics have to react. They did this in the MDR, saying it's now COVID and we push this all back 1 year. It's not only COVID. The MDR system is not ready either. So everybody is happy to be able to push this back 1 year. But we cannot be sure that the same thing happens for the IVDR. So make sure that the ball is not in your camp. You should be ready to go with a notified body the day the IVDR is mandatory. Get help, organize, you do not wait. Start now. This is the conclusion of what I would like to share with you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, there was a lot going on in the chat function, but your colleague Sylvia, thank you, Sylvia, she and Robin, they already answered many of the questions. There was one from Gerd Lüttke. He's asking if there's also something like the Emergency Use Authorization, EUA, like it is in the US. I think there wasn't an answer.
Yeah, we don't have such a thing in Europe. There is national member states that did something related to the COVID on a national basis, but there is nothing in the IVDR ruling that is really comparable to the emergency use access that we have in the US. I mean, if anybody has input or knows more about that, there are national programs, but on an EU level, according to what we know, there is nothing in place that is really comparable.
Michael, I say there is an article in the IVDR which says pretty much the same as nowadays under IVDD. The member states have the option to do sort of an emergency use authorization. So it is, so to say, the same situation as in the US. However, the disadvantage in Europe is we don't have clear guidelines like it is the case in the US. So there are clear guidelines in the US, but this is not the case in Europe, which is a disadvantage in our market.
Yeah. So in Europe, I mean, you can get granted a national authorization, but this is then only valid for the country in which you get granted this authorization. And I mean, this is probably for manufacturers the big issue, because you will have to apply to several countries then.
Sorry, what Michael said, I think that for the moment, under the IVDD, there is not much interest for the in vitro diagnostic devices to go under this emergency country by country program in Europe, as where if you register by self-certification your test, you have access to all the European market. This will probably change under the IVDR.
For sure, but only by virtue of the classification switch. You are not anymore able to do self-certification. So many of the devices, they will end up, I mean, today, actually, the COVID tests, they are not list A, not list B, and not self-tests. So they are self-certification.
Michael, it seems that there are two more questions pending.
Yes.
All the others seems to be answered. So one is from Sebastiani Federico. An A extraction kit are not providing results, but material that will be processed in analytical instruments. So I have some doubts that could be in class A under IVDR, isn't it?
I think I agree. The thing is really, if you look at the, if you look at the white paper that has been published by BSI where this question is discussed, it is obviously a problem for all the manufacturers of those robots. If there is no specific reagent designated related to the intended purpose of the disease that you want to detect, you have a problem because it's the instrument itself that could be considered giving the result then, and then you have a problem with the classification.
Okay, the second question seems to be answered by Sabine, Ose, and Sebastian already. The question was, is there any guidance on how to prepare a product claim? It seems to be a key item. I have not seen a process description yet.
There is this the guidance from I think it's MedTech Europe, and it's also published on the European Union website. But the thing is that this guidance does not take into account the two examples that I presented really, because even though you use that guidance, you may be at the point where you think you can end up in class A, but I think you won't be able because it's not a specific reagent that is assigned to the device, or there is the other problem with the definitions that are somehow not clear. And these guidance related to these definitions, that is not yet available according to my knowledge.
If I may add something here, hello Michael.
Hi Sabine.
I saw the MedTech guidance, and it gives really good help on how to classify, but it has to be considered that MedTech is only one part of the interested parties. So I'm pretty sure that the notified bodies working group will come up with something more specific, so that manufacturers might be placed in a situation where you can look into that guidance and then identify how to correctly word the intended use. So what we see in instructions for use where you really have the intended uses is that more the method is claimed rather than the intended purpose. And the method is not what you use to classify, it's the purpose. So I fully agree with Michael that then there is some work needed on the side of the manufacturers to ensure that there are no misunderstandings. So if it is, for example, we usually see detection of antibodies against, and that's not the purpose, that's the method. So this does not help in classification. If it is a screening test, if it is to monitor a patient, for example, beta HCG can be used for pregnancy tests, but also to monitor cancer in male patients. So it really is important for all manufacturers to understand that this is a key point in the preparation for the IVDR.
Yeah. And the thing what we observe sometimes or quite often is that manufacturers, they do a quick jump in this classification. They more or less read what is available, and then they say, I will be class A. So I don't have a lot of panic to do because I will continue to be self-certified. And that is the danger. The danger is then not to focus on performance evidence, not to focus on clinical data, and not being ready when guidance finally turns out and there is an agreement on this classification. And if you learn, and that at a late point in this process, that you are not class A, you are class B or even C, then you have a problem, because you won't be ready. And then there is a hard deadline for the self-certified devices. The hard deadline is May 22. And if in April 22 this guidance and the stuff comes out and it turns out you are not anymore Class A, then you have 1 month left and you won't make it.
So thanks, Michael. I think we should get going to the second speaker. I see that there were two more questions. One is from Sonja Renner and one is from Diana Ramirez. So please keep your questions and take them to the Q&A session at 11.